Hello everyone, my name is Cestrone, and welcome to an economic panel discussion on the topic, the free market versus government intervention. I'm the president of the SRU Young Americans for Liberty, and I will be moderating this discussion. I want to first explain who Young Americans for Liberty are and why we chose to host this event. Young Americans for Liberty is a nationwide organization that seeks to recruit, train, educate, and mobilize students on the ideals of liberty and the Constitution. Founded in 2008, YAL now has a network of over 26,000 students in nearly 300 chapters on college campuses nationwide. Thanks to this booming network, YAL is unrivaled as the largest, most active, and fastest growing pro-liberty youth organization in the country. YAL initiatives like Visualize the Debt, the Petition to End the Wars, and Constitution Week have helped highlight some of the most important issues on our time on campuses across the country. YAL's Year of Youth program equipped an army of youth activists this year with proper campaign tools heading into 2012 elections. And YAL's recent campaign boot camp initiative will train 1,000 grassroots activists in key states across the country by election day. So to learn more about Young Americans for Liberty, you can visit the national website at yalliberty.org. Also, if you look under pamphlets, I know we ran out. Our information, also on our next meeting, is on the pamphlet, so you can look at the pamphlet too. So why did we choose to host this economic panel discussion? We live in unprecedented times. As cliche as that sounds, it's true. We are living through history that will be studied and written about for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Mostly everyone here feels uncertain about what tomorrow brings. Each day brings news of little or no job growth, fast rising prices, and politicians who seem very good at getting very little done. Frustration is a natural emotion that we all should feel towards the financial conditions we face. With frustration comes the desire to seek answers to the questions that will mark our generation and future ones as well. How has America, one of the most greatest, most prosperous nations in history, fallen financially? How could the American dream seem such a novel concept today? And how did we get to this beaten point? And what must we do to change the course of this great nation to one that leads to prosperity and growth? We've all enrolled in college for the purpose of working hard, learning new skills, and personal growth in hopes of one day securing a job and making a living for ourselves. I know you are scared of what's out there. I am too. I feel angry at the circumstances I find myself in. Having a degree but very few prospects, earning money that could buy fewer goods each year, and having questions to problems that few will dare answer. This is why my organization, the SRU Young Americans for Liberty, is hosting this event. We want answers just like you. Benjamin Franklin once said that the doorstep to the temple of wisdom is the knowledge of our own ignorance. So tonight, we seek knowledge together by asking our panelists questions about our economic troubles. Our four panelists will bring varying viewpoints to the questions tonight, so I hope we all will gain insight on our current economic conditions. After the 6 questions, we will also have an audience Q&A. So be prepared to speak what's on your mind. After this event, also, we're going to have pizza out in the auditorium, out in the hall. So please, after the discussion, everyone's getting crazy now. After the discussion, please don't just try to run out the doors and catch the last few minutes of Dancing with the Stars. Stay, engage in dialogue with each other, eat some food, and let's have a nice night. So, let's move on to the professors. It is my pleasure to introduce the 4 distinguished panelists that will be leading us tonight. We're going to first start with Dr. Ritenour from Grove City, right to my left. A native of Grand Island, Nebraska, Dr. Ritenour graduated with honors in 1989 from Northwestern College in Orange City, Iowa, where he received a Bachelor's of Arts in Economics. Following graduation, he worked as an economist for the United States Bureau of Labor Statistics. He subsequently completed his PhD in economics in 1997 at Auburn University in Auburn, Alabama. He has lectured for the Action Institute, the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and the Institute for Principal Studies. He has additionally served as visiting professor at the University of Angers in France. He is author of Foundations of Economics and Christian View and a contributor to 2 great books, Great Austrian Economics and A Noble Calling, Devotions and Essays for Business Professionals. He has worked and published, and has been published in various periodicals, including the American Journal of Economics and Sociology, the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics, the Free Market, the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, and the Wall Street Journal. His research includes the history of economic thought, economic development, cultural economics, monetary economics, and Christian social thought. Dr. Ritenour and his wife Michelle have been married for 19 joyous years and have 2 daughters. All right, Dr. Ritenour. Next up is Dr. Jeffrey M. Herbener. Dr. Jeffrey M. Herbener is chairman of the Department of Economics and professor of economics at Grove City College. He earned his bachelor's degree in economics from Nebraska Wesleyan University and his master's degree and PhD in economics from Oklahoma State University. He is editor of 2 books, The Meaning of Ludwig von Mises and The Pure Time Preference Theory of Interest, and over 100 articles in popular and scholarly venues, including the Wall Street Journal, Investor's Business Daily, the Quarterly Journal of Austrian Economics, and the Journal of Libertarian Studies. Dr. Herbener is a senior fellow of the Ludwig von Mises Institute and a fellow at the Center for Vision and Values. Dr. Herbener, everyone. Next up is our 2 professors from Slippery Rock University. First is Dr. David Kalb. Dr. David Kalb is a professor of economics and the chairman of the School of Business at Slippery Rock University for the past 8 years. He earned his PhD in economics from Southern Illinois University and his Master of Arts degree in economics from Central Michigan University. He has published works in the area of tuition policy and case studies and regional economic impact analysis. His current research is in the area of summer school as a venue center for the university. He is currently a member of the President's Sustainability Commission at SRU and has been past president of the Pennsylvania Economic Association and has been teaching economics at Slippery Rock University for 34 years. Dr. David Kalb, everyone.
Get it!
And last but not least, Dr. Frederick Tannery. Woo! All right. Dr. Tannery is Associate Professor of Business at Slippery Rock University and the Faculty Advisor to the Economics Honor Society. He earned his bachelor's degree at Penn State and PhD at the University of Pittsburgh. He studies labor markets, including the impact of unemployment insurance on the duration of unemployment and the economics of education. He is currently engaged in a project analyzing the relationship between earnings and employment growth. His research on unemployment insurance has been cited by the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Bloomberg News Service, the Congressional Record, and other major newspapers. He has received grants from the Sloan Foundation and has done consulting work for the Economic Policies Institute and the PA State System of Higher Education. Dr. Tannery, everyone. So it's clear that we have a distinguished panel of experts with us. So without further ado, let's dive deep into the financial waters, beginning with Grove City. All right, this is the first question. According to CNN Money, the sticker price of studying and living on campus at the average public university rose 5.4% for in-state students, or about $1,100 to $21,447 this fall, the College Board estimated. The chief cause of that increase, CNN stated, was a dramatic spike in tuition and fees at hundreds of public universities. Tuition at the average public university jumped 8.3% to $8,244. Here's the question. Why are college costs outpacing inflation?
Right, well, first of all, before we begin asking why, I think it's helpful to note that inflation, as measured by the CPI, is a weighted average, so it's not surprisingly, as with all averages, some things are higher than average and some things are lower. So that's not an anomaly, but the question is, why is tuition one of the things that are higher? And I would essentially argue that it's basically because there's a lot of government money that's been poured into higher education. And because of that, the people that are demanding a college education, namely the students or the students' parents, are not bearing the full cost of their education or paying the full price. And so you have government subsidies to higher education that artificially increases the demand for college education, say in the form of Pell Grants. Pell Grant appropriations has increased greatly over the last few years. Pell Grant subsidies doubled, for instance, from just 2008 to 2010. They increased another 10.8% since just last year. Guaranteed student loans are also on the rise. Guaranteed student loans account for more than 3/4 of the $77 billion students borrowed for the 2006-2007 academic year, for example. And these student loans, a large percentage of them are guaranteed student loans. And because they're guaranteed by the government, that means the lenders don't really need to worry whether or not the borrower is creditworthy. And so that gives an incentive for banks to make the loans. Additionally, the maximum borrowed amount is also not really determined by whether or not the borrower can pay back the loan, but by perceived financial aid, according to the formula taken from information on the pre-application federal student aid form. Interest rates are also, for these loans, are also artificially low, again, because they're subsidized in large part by the government. The average, in 2007, for example, the average interest rate paid on a guaranteed student loan was 6.8%. Private loans that can be taken out, the interest rates are in general much higher, some rising, well, they vary from quarter to quarter, and sometimes rising to as much as 20%. And so we have incentives for banks to go ahead and make these loans because the government's guaranteeing them, and there is an incentive for students to borrow the money because the interest rates are held artificially low. I would also point out that because of this, there is a significant increase in the amount that has been borrowed by the students. The average student in the class of 2011 will graduate with a debt of $27,200. And so the bottom line is, with all of this borrowing, what are they doing? They're spending it on tuition. So government subsidies stimulate demand, which results in higher college tuition. And a large amount of this government money is not used necessarily to subsidize classroom instruction, but it is it's going to subsidize an increase in administration. The number of non-faculty professional staff per 100 students has more than doubled since 1976. I would say largely because of the government large S that's being poured into education. And that coupled with the fact that the way education typically, higher education is typically done, heavy on the brick and heavy on the mortar, sort of puts the education industry, if you want to call it that, in a situation where it's hard for them to benefit from increases in productivity in terms of the professors. And so you have a situation with excess demand, and you end up colleges and universities not always able to recoup the or lower their costs through productivity gains through in terms of construction, and you have higher demand, supplies not keeping up, and so tuition is increasing, and then we get this leapfrog. So you have higher tuition, so we have higher perceived need for aid. We get more aid, which causes an increased demand, which causes higher tuition, which causes an increased perceived for need, which causes an increased subsidization, and we just go on and on and on, and that's why we are where we are.
Thank you. Siparag.
Well, this tells part of the story because what we're talking about is tuition being driven by demand, and that's a matter of access to higher education. And certainly I would agree that the changes in the way the Stafford loans were awarded, where parent income is no longer considered part of the formula, also with Pell Grants. But there's a lot of other things that drive this, and part of it beyond just the cost due to demand. Education is one of those things where it is very capital intensive, but part of that is due to the need for modern technology facilities, modern laboratories, modern libraries, and no end of amenities that students like. And we're always in the process of capital improvements. People no longer want to live in concrete block dorms where they're layered 4 to a person, so we have to do this. And if you look, part of the basic issue of the story is the revenue comes from 3 places. Revenue comes from state support, revenue comes from student tuition, or revenue comes from giving. And if we look at 2 of those being under attack, both the giving because of that economy, the amount that endowments are returning, and now we have the state withdrawing some of their support. I came here, as you said, 34 years ago. The state of Pennsylvania paid 80% of the cost of an undergraduate's education. Today that's 20%. So if the state is backing out of their contribution to higher education, and we still have this demand situation where everybody wants to be here, that can only be subsidized through tuition. Now, why is the state backing out? Because the state is being badgered by spending more money on corrections, more money on social welfare programs, and the funding of pension funds. And so we're kind of caught in a bind, and I agree, students have not paid the full cost of their education, but as we go forward, that's going to happen more and more, and that's going to continue to push increases in tuition.
Thank you. On to question number 2, which goes to Slippery Rock University. Slippery Rock. According to the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, healthcare costs have been rising for several years. Expenditures in the United States on healthcare surpassed $2.3 trillion in 2008, more than 3 times the $714 billion spent in 1990 and over 8 times the $253 billion spent in 1980. Stemming this growth has been a major policy priority as the government, employers, and consumers increasingly struggle to keep up with healthcare costs. Here's the question. What is the best way to slow the growth of healthcare costs in the U.S. over the next quarter century?
Wish I knew. Yeah. Raise your hand if you're getting bonus points. Yeah, all right. Thanks for the warm-up. Well, something's got to be done about healthcare costs because it's going to threaten the performance of other sectors. It's going to threaten the overall economy. So we've got to do something to affect the costs. Can you hear me okay?
See a little bit, give it up.
Well, let's think about expenditures. I mean, healthcare costs. Let's think about it as expenditures first. And expenditures, remember, it's prices times some quantity. Some things are prices and quantities. And first, let's focus on prices. Well, healthcare prices have operate under a different regime. Imagine if you, what person A provided a service to person B and sent person C the bill. In this world, there's absolutely no incentives to control costs. There's no incentives to control prices, nor is there any incentives to control quantities. And that's one of the things that happens with third-party payers that you have in insurance-driven healthcare costs. So this is responsible for many of the price increases. Now, so let's think about just some price data, because it's been pointed out that government measures the prices of goods and services through the CPI. And the CPI, the overall CPI in October of 2011 was 226.42, and it's measured at a base of 1982 to 1984 is equal to 100, and that means what cost $100 in 1982 to 84 cost $226.42 in October of 2011, last month. Well, they also calculate these price indices for different kinds of commodities. The one for healthcare was a whopping 403.43. So that means what cost $100 in 82 to 84 now costs $403 substantial increase. Now, let's think about what would happen to healthcare costs if the healthcare prices increased, imagine other price increases. Right, so I go back to 2009 data. And in 2009, 1 year after 2008, healthcare expenditures amounted to $2.486 trillion. This was 17.6% of GDP, and it came to over $8,000 per capita. Now, if I take a look at the healthcare, the CPI in 2009, divide that by the healthcare in 2009, and adjust the healthcare expenditures, it turns out that all of a sudden now, healthcare would fall, if the prices increase the same as the prices of the CPI, healthcare would cost $1.426 trillion, fall to 10.1% of GDP, and be only $4,600 per capita. Right. Now let's take a look at the quantities. There's large increases in healthcare services tied to demographic characteristics. And these demographic characteristics are likely to persist. So if you take a look at projected healthcare costs for 2020, they're going to be $4.6 trillion, or 19.8% of GDP. Right. Now, that's just a projection. Now, so something must be done. And you can say, well, usually it's the prices that rations goods and services in the economy. And the question is, can we make people pay? But the problem is that mom needs an operation, we don't have the money. And that presents real political problems, particularly at times when you're under a lot of stress. So I don't think it's likely that that happens. And there's another couple of things we can do around the edges of limit reimbursements and maybe regulations. The quantities. Well, the incentives for quantities are roughly the same as they are for prices. And we can look at different programs, defensive medicine, remote managed care. But in general, I think those forces at work that are going to try to limit prices and limit quantities are weak. And so what I think that maybe we should go to a single payer system like you have in Canada and European countries. Now, the advantages of a single payer system is that it controls the prices. They control the prices. It can limit services. It can deny coverage. It can lower administrative costs, and it's politically more acceptable and sensibly denied to everybody. The disadvantages is bureaucracy. It's political decision-making, it's lower quality of care, less incentives for research and development, and the question is it worth it? Well, like anything, it's a cost-benefit calculation. So if it's how much do I save going to a single-payer plan, and if I'm going to save a lot of money, then I'm going to bite the bullet and I'm going to say I'm going to do it. And plus, there's little evidence to suggest that these increases in expenditures that we have in the U.S. relative to other countries actually improve the quality of our health care.
Thank you. Grove City?
Well, you've come out this evening. We appreciate the great turnout to hear 4 economists. You're about to find out that the economists have a large degree of agreement on many basic ideas, and then we certainly disagree on other things. And so I'm in large agreement with the analysis you just heard about prices being driven up in healthcare much more substantially than they have in the general economy because of additional spending. Let me give you some more statistics on this. If you look at 1960, the national health expenditures in 1960 were 5% of GDP. So we spent 5% of our incomes, roughly speaking, on healthcare services. In 2009, as you already heard, it was 18% of GDP. It's projected to go up into the 20% rate soon. So in 2009, we spent $2.5 trillion on healthcare. One point that I would make in addition to what we've heard already about this is that 1.1 trillion of that was spent by the government on our behalf, about 45%. And another 33% was spent through private insurance. So you have almost 80% of healthcare expenditures that are made by third parties, so to speak, on our behalf. And this creates what we call in economics moral hazard. It creates behavior on the part of the recipients or participants in the system that tends to destroy the system itself. I mean, imagine if we did the same thing for purchasing gasoline, purchasing food. In other words, we all contributed through taxation to a big pool of funds that would go to the subsidization of the purchase of our gasoline, and then the price would be lowered to 50 cents, or it would be lowered to some ridiculously small level on each time we went to buy the gas. Well, we'd buy ever more, right? And the expenses would increase ever more because the tax burden would have to increase in the pool of funds so that we could spend enough to pay for all that. So this is the problem, and I would suggest that we shouldn't go to a single payer system, that we should simply return to a more market-oriented system where we get rid of the government subsidies that come into these third-party payment systems. This would eliminate the moral hazard problem. We should put the money back into our hands. Let us as patients and our doctors and healthcare providers settle these matters. And then the final part of the program, I think, would be that, as in the old days, we would provide healthcare to the poor through charity. Healthcare professionals should take this burden upon themselves to provide to those who can't afford it, just as they did prior to World War II.
Thank you. Now we are actually a little bit ahead of time, so if anyone wants to add something after that, just put your hand up and we can extend the question. Moving on. Also, if you can please just move your mics just a little bit closer. Thank you. This question goes to Grove City. Grove City. Back in August, Warren Buffett wrote an opinion piece in the New York Times asking the federal government to raise taxes on the wealthiest Americans, himself included. Quote, "My friends and I have been coddled long enough by a billionaire-friendly Congress," he argued, unquote. Quote, "It's time for the government to get serious about shared sacrifice," unquote. Here's the question. Would raising taxes be bad or good for the economy? Should there be any tax increases of any kind to increase government revenues? And that's not just for the wealthiest Americans, but for anyone.
The answer to the first question, would raising taxes be bad for the economy, is yes. It comes just from the definition of what we mean by the economy. The economy is all of us working together with the resources that we own to produce the things that satisfy our ends. And we arrange our production in what economists like to call a division of labor. In other words, we're not self-sufficient in production. We don't try to produce everything for ourselves. We specialize in producing certain things, and then through trade, we obtain the things that we don't produce. And we trade away the things that we produce for other people. And in doing this, we try to economize. That's where the whole terminology comes from. We talk about an economy. It's economizing. That is to say, we try to arrange production in such a way that we get higher value things produced, and we produce them in lower cost ways. Now, in the economy, we also have specialists in organizing production. We call them entrepreneurs. And so certain people have these skills more than others of us, and they're able to do this more effectively in a more efficient manner. And in order for them to make economizing decisions for the rest of us, we have to have a market economy. Because it's in the market economy that we register our preferences for various goods and refuse to buy other goods that we don't particularly want to have because they don't satisfy our ends. And so every day the expenditures that we make, we're, so to speak, voting in favor of certain entrepreneurs' decisions to produce some things, and we're voting against other entrepreneurs and their decisions to do other things. And because of this, entrepreneurs know what is valuable to us. They know when demand is going up for a product, it's more valuable to people, they should be producing more of it. They know when demand is going down, that the opposite is the case. And in the market, they have incentive to respond to our demands because they earn profit from the spending if they cater to it, and they suffer losses if they do not. Now, taxation, on the other hand, is a coercive extraction by the state that takes wealth from private hands and places it into the hands of the state. of government officials. This harms the economy because it diverts resources away from the economizing process that I spoke about a minute ago, and transfers it into the non-economizing process of politics. The reason political decision-making about production does not economize for us in society is because politicians lack the knowledge to know what it is that we in fact value. They have no way to register our demands for different things, or our dislike for other things that we can express in the market by withdrawing our expenditures on those things. And they have no incentive, monetary incentive at least, to respond to what it is that we value and what it is that we don't value. Let me just take one brief anecdote here to illustrate the problem. Ron Suskind, in his book Confidence Men, wrote about President Obama, and Suskind is favors Obama, he's not an enemy of Obama. He wrote about Obama's decision-making on the bailout money, as you remember from 2008. So Obama was sitting around the room with a bunch of advisors, and they were coming up with ways to spend this money. And Obama was rejecting them one by one. One of the things he rejected was more spending on health care. Because he said, healthcare, we don't need healthcare in this country, it's women's work. And then somebody else suggested infrastructure. He said, that's it. That's what we need to do. Infrastructure is man's work, it's man's identity to get out there and sweat with the asphalt or whatever he had in mind. You see, he's not making a production decision based upon our preferences. Now, to the contrary, if you think of a guy like Steve Jobs, who made decisions to produce iPads and iPhones and all the great communication devices we like. Well, he doesn't get our money until he produces a product, offers it to us, and we like it, we buy it, we try it out, we don't like it, we refuse to buy it. We have direct control over his production decisions. We can make him, we can break him. Imagine though how Tim Cook would now make decisions about Apple's production activity if he were given the power of taxation. Why would he care anymore about what we value by buying the good or refusing to buy it? He would just produce whatever he wanted to produce, whatever he decided personally to produce, because the money would roll in regardless. And so this, I would say, is the fundamental issue. This is why taxations are bad for the economy. Do I have 10 seconds?
20 seconds.
Let me just comment on the second question, because I think maybe there's more debate here between our two sides. Should there be any tax increase of any kind to increase government revenue? I would say no. There should not be any tax increase to increase government revenue. In fact, government revenues in 2011, roughly $2.17 trillion, would be enough to fund the entire government's budget, entire federal government budget of 2003, when the government spent $2.15 trillion. And I dare say we could go back to the 2003 level of spending for the federal government to not see people dying in the streets, or no air traffic control, no national defense. I think that would be acceptable.
Thank you. Sabara?
Yeah, this is in some sense a philosophical issue here. The idea about taxes is that's an idea about how do you finance government. So we can either have taxes as we don't have very much of, and run up large deficits, and currently the economic conditions sort of militate against increases in taxes, or we can borrow money, or we can inflate the economy. And the Fed has been adding to their balance sheets by buying up treasury bonds, and we sell a lot of these things to the rest of the world. So it's really about how you finance government. Taxes is that's incidental. It's what are the resources government requires, and then so question about what is it the government should do. I mean, I'm a fan of Steve Jobs as much as anybody, and I certainly wouldn't want the government to make iPods and all those tools. But on the other hand, you need national defense. And I don't think Apple would like to have national defense, and somebody has to operate the schools. Now, I think they could be operating maybe more efficiently in the private sector to some extent. But the current strategies that are provided by the government sector the police and fire departments, all those regulatory activities, and plus there's a big role redistribution. Do we want to provide for poor members of society? So do you think whatever the grace of God go wide? We think we want to help people when they're sick, and even if they can't afford it. And you think the answer to those questions is yes, then we have to have government do the job. And whether we tax them, which I think is, on the long run, taxes should pay for government services. So you tell me what the government services are, and I'll tell you what I think the taxes ought to be. And we see a lot of problems in the rest of the world because people, they don't raise taxes. And I think that no matter what the government does, we should tax people to pay for those things. And I think that's the way how I think about this issue. So it's not taxes versus no taxes. It's about what does the government spend, and you have to tax people to pay for those things because taxes is the cost of what the government services are.
Thank you. Moving on to question 4. This one goes to Slippery Rock University. Slippery Rock. There has been a large amount of criticism and blame towards capitalism in the free market for the 2008 financial crisis. President Obama argues deregulation caused the crisis. Quote, "Our free market was never meant to be a free license to take whatever you can get, however you can get it. Unfortunately, instead of establishing a 21st century regulatory framework, we simply dismantled the old one, aided by a legal but corrupt bargain in which campaign money all too often shaped policy and watered down oversight." Unquote. Here's the question. Was the free market and deregulation responsible for the 2008 financial crisis?
It's not a simple yes or no answer to this question, and Lord knows there's enough blame to go around on all sides. But I think the answer is it's more likely to be probably yes than probably no. So I think the private sector probably had a bigger role than the others. So let's think about the epicenter of this financial crisis was both the housing and financial services market. But the government didn't. They changed the rules in the housing market for mortgage financing. But then the private sector operated on these rules and spread the problem to the financial services through the financial system. And I think the problem with the financial system is one that we're really paying the price for today. Now, let's think about, first of all, the role of government, and they're culpable to some extent as well. There's been a lot of government rules and regulations that try to do things like promote affordable housing. Some of them were and increase the incidence of home ownership among different members of the population. Now, one of them was the Neighborhood Redevelopment Act. It was designed to increase home ownership among people with lower than the average income, lower than the median income. And they took a look at people that applied for mortgages, and a lot of these people just qualified for mortgages. And so what they did is said, let's institute this special mortgage to people that can't quite come up to it. It's called subprime. Subprime mortgage is a little bit of higher interest rates than people that are riskier in the sense that they don't have as much assets or income as some other people. Now, so also what the government does, these government-sponsored enterprises like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they make loans. They extend loans to people and also buy up mortgages. And they were mandated to have a high fraction of their portfolio made to people with lower than the median income. So that also contributed to this. And they bought up a lot of these mortgages, and that was another, they played a role because they were financial firms as well. And then another role was the Fed, and that's some people's favorite target. And what the Fed did, the Federal Reserve System, is that they had an easy money, low interest rate policy. So the Fed kept the interest rates low. And lower interest rates stimulated demand for housing and stimulated enormous price increases in the housing bubble. But it also promoted a lot of abundant financial speculation. So a lot of the speculation that was due is because of the easy money, let's put our money into this instrument or that instrument. In addition, at the time when this was occurring, the economy was, best performing sectors of the economy were the housing sector and financial services. Housing sector construction provides lots of jobs, and people are always concerned about jobs. It's not just now. And also, financial services was a very profitable sector. All right, so, and all these people thought that housing prices would fall. Now, they think of the role of the private market. What they did is, there was a lack of sound business judgment. I mean, there were these liar loans and no-doc loans, and they made loans to anybody that said they had money. Everybody knew that, both sides knew to this party that the person didn't have money, but they all thought the housing prices were going to go up, and in 6 months, housing prices go up, you refinance, and you get a regular loan. And I think this facilitated a lot of what went on. They also created this pool of mortgages called mortgage-backed securities and collateralized debt obligations. So they put the risky loans with really good loans, and they sold all these loans. So it's all like putting the bad apple with all the good ones. And so this contaminated all the loans. When there was non-performance in this, all of these people, they didn't perform, and all of these people had a lot of difficulties. Then there was these credit agencies like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. They rated bonds AAA. And so people, why not buy them? Because the Freddie Mac, the S&P and Moody's, S&P and Moody's gave them the highest ratings. And a lot of people conjectured that the ratings were a function of their relationship with investment banks, and now they know better. Banks bought these CDOs without any due diligence. And then sometimes these loans were often, insured with what's called a credit default swap. And the people that sold these credit default swaps, they didn't operate under normal insurance rules. They couldn't pay when things went south on the market. They weren't able to pay. Leverage ratios of private companies were 30 or 40 to 1. And in addition, there were enormous financial rewards. So short-term financial rewards. So I would say, I can make $10 million this week. I'm not going to worry about next week. I'm going to make this money. And I think that was a culprit as well. So I think on balance, I think the government influenced the housing industry, but then the private sector translated that into other sectors of the economy.
Thank you. Grove City?
Yes, I'd like to thank the gentleman on the other side of the aisle for, I think, providing a very good case for why the answer to the question is clearly no. The free market was not responsible for the crisis in 2008 at all. It was a clear answer, a clear negative, because the free market, the truly free market, is a private property society. And a private property society is productive, reap higher incomes through higher real wages, higher interest income, and higher economic profits by satisfying the desires of other people in society. The unproductive, the wasteful, they reap losses. Entrepreneurs who make unwise investments waste resources. The free market, I should point out as well, is far from unregulated. It is highly regulated by the people in the market. The buyers who want to buy and the people who refrain from buying when they don't want to buy. Entrepreneurs are tremendously regulated by the profit and loss calculation. They're not regulated by the state, but they are regulated. And as was pointed out, I think the key culprit that stimulated the crisis, if you want to talk about the housing bubble, if you want to talk about all the derivatives, all of the mortgage-backed securities that were created, the question is who bankrolled the whole thing. And the institution that bankrolled the whole thing was the Fed. Post 9/11, we had massive credit expansion on the part of the central bank. And that is what resulted in artificially low interest rates that stimulated all of this malinvestment. Entrepreneurs were induced artificially low interest rates to engage in new investment projects that the lower interest rates made look profitable when really they were not, from the perspective of people's preferences in society. Many of these investments were not financed by real savings, but by the money created out of thin air by the banking system supported by the Fed. So that results then in a real distortion of the production structure, the capitalist structure. Capital is directed away from the preferences of society and towards the preferences of the entrepreneurs that are getting new money. And this malinvestment in the booming housing markets contrasted with other important bottlenecks that were not getting the new money for, such as, say, the commodity sector. This malinvestment was helped along, as was pointed out, by Fannie and Freddie, government-sponsored entities, helped along by the Community Reinvestment Act, another intervention in the economy. At every step of the way in this crisis, people were encouraged to make foolish investments, knowing full well that either they're getting the money first from the state, or if things go bad, Uncle Ben is going to bail us out. And that's essentially, in large part, what has happened. So I think it's clearly not the case that we can lay the blame of the crisis at the foot of the free market, because we never had one to begin with.
Thank you. Next question goes to Grove City. Grove City. Bush and incoming President Obama took numerous measures to stave off the financial crisis in 2008. The emergency loan program to keep banks afloat, rescue of the automobile industry, and the stimulus package. They said these measures were needed to avert financial doomsday. Here's the question. Were these measures necessary to avert financial disaster? And please, if you can, speak a little bit clearer into the microphone. The people in the back are having a hard time hearing. Thank you.
I'll do my best. I'll put this microphone to the test. All right, let's see. I would say no. The measures undertaken by Bush and Obama were not necessary to stave off the financial crisis. In fact, in some sense, they prolonged it. And we're still living with some of the negative consequences. The whole thing hasn't fully played itself out. And for reasons, partly what I already said, the financial crisis was a result of malinvestment stimulated by monetary intervention on the part of the Federal Reserve. And because of the artificially low interest rates that were created beginning in 2001 and continuing, frankly, throughout the middle 2000s, stimulated an incentive on the part of entrepreneurs to borrow money and with that money, buy up land, labor, capital, which is directed to parts of the economy that they otherwise would not be able to direct it toward if it wasn't for the fact that they were getting easy money. And in 2008, the crisis, in 2008, it became apparent that we couldn't go on like this. The Fed began to raise interest rates and started to slow the rate of growth of the money supply. Didn't stop, but just slowed the rate of growth of the money supply. Interest rates started going back up to reflect the actual preferences and the actions of real saving on the part of individuals. And then, as they say, for many entrepreneurs, the jig was up. And it turned out that projects we thought were profitable with low interest rates, when the interest rates went back up, well, things aren't so profitable after all. And so they were faced with the crisis and they had to liquidate. And when those malinvestments became apparent, the market value, not surprisingly, of those projects fell dramatically. And part of the assets owned by those entrepreneurs that are now stuck with unprofitable investments, those assets dropped, the value of those assets drops, and a lot of those assets were the property of the banking system, or at least financed by it. As unprofitable projects were liquidated, companies went bust, and people in those projects lost their jobs. Individuals started to default on their mortgages and other credit payments. Bankrupt companies stopped paying their loans to banks. Asset prices such as stock equity shares collapsed. As a consequence, consequence of all this, the value of the bank assets evaporated, and that reduced their equity. Bank liquidity was affected negatively, rather, as borrowers defaulted on their bank loans. And so banks were in a sticky wicket, as they say. The moral of the story, however, is economic theory teaches us that economic recovery requires a restructuring of the capital structure. It requires the structure of production to adapt back to the desires of people in society, the voluntary actions of saving in society. And so malinvestments must be liquidated, and that's the bottom line. Relative prices must adjust. Housing prices that are artificially high must be allowed to fall. If not, even more houses are going to be built. We're going to be encouraging people to build things that we have too much of already. Savings must be available to finance investments in sectors from which investment was unprofitably directed. Additional savings then hastens the adjustment process. And keeping rates continually artificially low provides little incentive for people to save their money and hence fund the actual readjustment process. Markets for land, labor, capital goods also must be as flexible as possible so that land, labor, and capital goods can be redirected to the most highly valued uses. Bankruptcies in this process of readjustment actually help speed up the adjustment process by encouraging rapid liquidation of the malinvestments and freeing up savings and factors of production to be directed towards the most highly valued ends. Now, all of these necessary adjustments were and continue to be hindered by government intervention. Unprofitable companies were propped up through subsidized loans, programs like cash for clunkers, and public works programs. The government actively propped up banks, they bought up troubled assets, they injected capital into bad banks. Bankruptcies were prevented, which slowed down the liquidation process. Government injected market rigidities through subsidized unemployment, through increased unemployment benefits. They tried to keep housing prices high through tax credits and continually to bankroll Fannie and Freddie. And so all of these actions, instead of staving off the crisis, they simply helped to prolong the agony.
Thank you. So just real quick, so there should have been zero bailouts, no stimulus packages, and no loans at all.
That's correct.
Libera?
Okay, well, some of the things that my colleague from Real City said I agree with, but his conclusion, I guess I disagree with from strenuously. Because the way that I read this question was, were the things that Bush and later President Obama did necessary to stave off financial crisis in 2008? And I guess the thing that I'm more interested in is opposed to the financial crisis in 2008 was a very real threat of an impending depression that could have come forward had we not acted decisively. And you know, the thing that I see about this question is that this question isn't really addressing how does we come to this problem, the long-run viability of the automobile industry in the United States, the effectiveness of fiscal policy, the role of either the administration or the Federal Reserve in long-run stimulation for economic growth. It basically says we're at a financial crisis and things look very, very bad like we do. And I'm not a big fan of fiscal policy. In fact, I don't particularly think fiscal policy works at all. And long teaching about the Federal Reserve System, the Federal Reserve System was originally established as a lender of last resort. It was established to bail out banks, keep them from going bankrupt, and keep financial panics from washing its way all through the economy. The Federal Reserve failed to do that in 1929, 30, 31. We had some 6,000 banks go bankrupt, and we were sunk down into a environment of a very severe depression. Ben Bernanke is a student of the Depression. I've paid a lot of attention to the Depression. My parents are both children of the Depression. And one of the things that scared me among anything else was, what would this economy do if we really did have a lot of fallout of everything? And the one thing that I'm concerned about is that my colleague here said the whole thing needed to play itself out. That just scares me to death. We're in a severe recession, like a depression, and this whole thing playing itself out, I'm not sure where it goes. And I guess the analogy that I use, if my house is on fire, I'm going to throw everything into the fire I could possibly throw at it, and then I'm going to worry about the water damage after this is all over. So some of the things that we need to consider about the role of the Fed and the role of some of these financial institutions, the viability of the automobile industry, and so forth, we do now need to consider. But I think at the time that these policies were taken, it was absolutely necessary to do that. And you mentioned a quote that Obama was not interested in fiscal stimulus for healthcare, but he was interested in that for construction, because construction was a man's job. This has been a man's recession. If you look at the unemployment rates of non-med, it's been much, much higher than in normal recessions. So he wasn't talking about that, I would suspect, from a a sexist standpoint, let's help men and not women. Let's help those people that are unemployed put men back to work because they're the ones that want to employ the largest numbers, and that's the construction industry. Whether that is a wise long-run policy or not, I'm not as sure it is. But in the short run, I'm not so sure it was such a bad idea.
Continue one more minute with this. Did you have any other remarks, Grove City?
Well, the only thing I would say is that I can understand the concern that we don't want, the fear that we let this thing play itself out, what's going to happen to it. But if the house is burning down, we don't want to pour more gas on the fire. And I think it does matter how we got here, because we got here through malinvestment stimulated by the Fed. Then more money simply encourages more malinvestment. It doesn't allow for the restructuring of the economy to get back to the wishes of people in society. So I think it does actually matter when we try to think about solutions. I think it does matter how do we get to the situation.
I guess my response to that is that if we're talking about the housing industry, I can easily understand a maladjustment because they have done all sorts of government programs to stimulate construction and new housing, get interest rates low, and we pump a lot of resources into that area, which might not be a wise thing. The solution to that is a long-run problem, though, and we had, when we were looking at this financial crisis, very short-run emergency, and the difference between what I do to solve a short-run emergency and then once it's solved, to change policy over the long run is very much different than I think that we do need to really look at our reliance on housing as an industry, the size of the automobile industry relative to the rest of our economy, as viable going down the long run. But in the short run, it was not a wise idea to employ 10% of labor force for the automobiles.
30 seconds, yeah.
Just one comment on the causes of the Great Depression. There's huge literature on this, and there is one side that talks about the deflation, as some of our colleagues have spoken about, being as a causal factor involved in the collapse of the economy. But there's another literature that says it wasn't that at all. It was a compiling of a bunch of other steps taken by the government that led to these problems. And just to give you one example of this, I only have 30 seconds. In Canada, during the same time period, 1930-1933, they had a similar decline, a deflation, decline in prices. They had not a single bank failure. Not a single one in Canada. And the reason they had no bank failures, according to this literature, is that they permitted branch banking, so that banks in all places in the country could be diversified, because they could have branches in other parts of the country making loans in those areas of specialization in those other parts of the country. Most of the banks in the United States that failed were in the Midwest, because they made agricultural loans. And they went through the same process that we've gone through lately with the housing collapse.
All right, moving on to our last question. This one goes to Slippery Rock University. And again, after this, we'll have an audience Q&A for a couple of questions from you guys. Slippery Rock. Washington has been focused on the deficit and spending cuts, but in the midst of the current jobless recovery, the recent unemployment rate is still around 9%, and the total amount of unemployed is around 14 million. Gold has also reached a historical high of $1,800 in October, and oil is hovering around $100 a barrel. Here's the question. What monetary policy should Washington and the Federal Reserve pursue to spur economic growth and restore value to the dollar?
Well, I wish I knew the answer to this question because I have some presidential candidates that probably win my efforts to. We talked a lot about the jobless economy and recovery, but I believe the economy has improved. The unemployment rate in Pennsylvania is now around 8%. And for all those of you that are college, soon to be college graduates worried about the future, the unemployment college graduates, I believe, is about 4.5%. So college education still seems like a pretty good offset to the economy. I see several questions here. What monetary policy should Washington and the Federal Reserve policy pursue for economic growth and restore value to the dollar? I'm assuming that you mean by Washington, you were talking more about the Obama administration, which is what we normally refer to as Washington. And, you know, also the issue of economic growth and restore value to the dollar, two totally different issues. First off, if I was going to recommend what monetary policy should the Federal Reserve System pursue, it's not much monetary policy the Federal Reserve can pursue. That's the only way the Federal Reserve really has any impact on anything in the economy is to increase the amount of reserves that banks have so banks can hold more money and in the process drive down interest rates. Interest rates are about as low as we're likely to see them. Banks have an adequate amount of reserves that is something not learning about. So I really think the Federal Reserve is just pretty much out of ammunition as far as anything that it's likely to be able to do. The only role that the Fed is going to have is that when, I say not yet, when the economy recovers, all of this liquidity that's been pumped into the economy is always has the threat of increasing inflation, and so the Fed might have to rapidly draw some of that out. From the Obama standpoint, or from Washington standpoint, the issue that I really see that's a drag on economic growth right now is the size of the federal deficit, or the federal national debt that we have. I looked at the debt clock before I came over here today, and our national debt is now $15 trillion, which amounts to about $48,000 for every one of us, but $133,000 for every taxpayer. And where we got into this debt, and again, I didn't answer the question on should we raise taxes, but one of the obvious issues is we can't continue to borrow money to finance the expenditures of goods and services, the purchase of goods and services and other sorts of things on the part of the government, and then expect the Federal Reserve System to effectively buy this debt up and monetize it to hold interest rates down. This is something that Washington, the Obama administration, whoever is going to be there in a year from now, is simply just going to have to get this debt crisis in hand. This involves one of two things. Either we cut spending, and cutting spending mainly looks at entitlement programs, social welfare programs, Medicare, Medicaid, spending on Social Security, all these things, or we raise taxes to pay for what it is that we buy. To me, the biggest drag on the economy right now is the uncertainty on the part of businesses. From what I understand, businesses have quite a bit of cash on hand. They're not willing to invest. They're not sure what the new health care plan is actually going to cost them. They're not sure where the economy is going. Confidence needs to be restored in the economy, and the only way that can be done is to get a handle on this deficit. The Republicans and the Democrats are obviously going to have to move a little closer to center. The Republicans don't want to raise any taxes. The Democrats don't want to cut any programs. There has to be a mix someplace there. But I think that's the only policy Washington can pursue. As far as the value of the dollar is concerned, I'm not so sure about restoring the value of the dollar. I'm not sure what the value of the dollar is supposed to be. It's kind of a market-determined thing. Americans have been wedded to purchasing foreign goods and services, and countries like China have been happy to artificially keep their currency in such a way to continue to encourage us to buy those goods and services. But frankly, the foreign sector is relatively small compared to the rest of the economy, and I'm not sure that the value of the dollar is the biggest concern that we have right now.
Thank you. Coach City?
Well, again, as economists, we're in agreement on many things, and I think it is well put on the other side of the table. What exactly the position that the Federal Reserve has, through its monetary policy in the past, put us in. So let me just elaborate on that a bit and then give my prescription for monetary policy in the future. Normally, the banking system keeps, on average, an 8% cash reserve or liquid reserve against our checking account balances. This is a typical thing that the Fed mandates or requires them to do. The Fed inflated so dramatically in an unprecedented fashion since 2008 that banks have absorbed so much reserve that they now hold well over 100% reserve. They hold more cash and liquid asset reserves than we have checking account balances. So they've gone from 8% to something like 110%. Now this, as my colleague across the table mentioned, creates a tremendous inflationary potential in the economy, tremendous monetary inflationary potential in the economy. Because if the banks begin to begin the process of creating credit and push that reserve back down to 8%, they'll increase the amount of our checkable deposits through loan creation, by 12.5 times. They'll increase their part of the money supply by 12.5 times. So there's a tremendous inflationary potential that the Fed has created in the system. And monetary policy the Fed should take is to eliminate this. They can do this. It's a very simple process. All they have to do is change the required ratio of reserves from 8% to 100%. They'll capture these reserves. The banks will still have over, well, nearly $500 billion in excess reserves if they do this, so they're still highly liquid. There isn't any particular reason to think that they would react in a bad way to this. So that's what I think the Fed policy should be. They should capture these reserves, as my colleague already mentioned. They should quit injecting uncertainty into the market. They should announce a policy and keep a very stable situation with the money supply to eliminate the uncertainty that's keeping businessmen from investing. That's a very important facet of their monetary policy. And then let me just make one comment on what I think it should be long-term. Once the Fed has created 100% reserves in the banking system, they take this short-run step, they could then go back to a real sound money system. We could go back to a system of commodity money. We could go back to a system of 100% reserve banking, where in this system we wouldn't have to worry about Fed-induced business cycles at all. And we could put aside these episodes of the Great Depression, of the 1970s, of the latest boom bust. We can put all this behind us.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Remember, the Fed operates under what's called a dual mandate. And the dual mandate is both to keep price stability, but it's also a problem of unemployment. And the Fed is looking at unprecedentedly long durations of unemployment. A lot of people have been out of work for over half a year, and there's adverse consequences for people to do that. So the Fed's stimulus isn't just designed to try to promote increased liquidity in business, to try to address those problems, and that's what the Fed's supposed to do. I mean, the European central banks having problems with this right now because they just operate under the other system, and right now they're capitalizing the European banks because they're really worried about their economy, and they're going to have real troubles, and that's what they decided to do. So they're stepping up, and the prospects of inflation are there, but I think this is what they do. And the idea is there anybody that operates without a Fed? I mean, I don't know. Principally, you could say maybe the Fed causes business cycles, but I don't know if there's any place that operates without a central bank. So we observe any place that doesn't have business cycles. I mean, I'm not a historian of these events, but I don't really know the answers.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, no, not in the world today. That's why we live in an age of inflation, because every country in the world operates under a central bank. If you look at the 19th century, then the United States, of course, they had a central bank a couple of times, quasi-central bank a couple of times in the first half of the 19th century, but not after this. But we still had booms and bust cycles because, as I mentioned, we still had a government-regulated system where banks were permitted to keep just a fraction of reserve against their checkable deposits, and they could issue more credit. create these chemical deposits and set in motion this same process. It wasn't organized by a central bank, it was the same process in But even so, under the classic gold standard of the 19th century, we did have rough price stability. The dollar bought essentially had the same purchasing power in 1914 when the Fed started operation as it did in 1814. And since the Fed has started operation in 1914, the dollar's lost over 95% of its purchasing power. It's lost 82% of its purchasing power since 1971. It's the last vestige of gold taken away from the system.
Thank you. All right, now we have about 20 minutes for audience Q&A. So if you do have a question, please put your hand up. We have people with microphones that will come to you. So we have someone over here. And you can direct it, please direct it to a school or a professor. Or you can leave it up to anyone. It's fine.
Yes, this is for Grove City. Being from Slippery Rock, we're fairly versed in their view of economics. And could you explain a little bit about the Austrian School and how they look at things differently than the mainstream and how you come to your conclusions versus that?
Again, real quick, if you can please speak louder into the microphone.
Well, I would say the main difference between the Austrian School and mainstream economics is that the approach of mainstream economists is to model the economy. So their conception is that the way to approach economics is to construct a model, usually mathematical model. And of course it has to be highly simplified, unrealistic we might say, to be tractable in a mathematical fashion, to be able to solve it. And then they simulate, they run simulations with the model, and it gives certain results, and they change parameters to see what happens in the model. If you increase the tax rate, what happens in production, or whatever it might be in the model. The Austrian School starts not with models, but with real human people. And we try to build economic theory from the actions of real human beings. Now, in a way, these two projects are not the antithesis of each other. It's possible for them, in a way, they're different projects altogether. What we're doing is trying to get at knowledge that's different from what the mainstream is trying to get at. They're trying to get at empirical knowledge. If you actually increase the money supply by 10% per year over the next 5 years, what will happen to the purchasing power of money? Will it go down by 5%? Will it go down by 6%? They try to direct a model that will predict what will happen in the real economy. The Austrians, to the contrary, try to simply understand what happens when human beings engage in action and social interaction. I would say that's the major difference.
Thank you. Someone else? Yes, you had your hand up. All right, over here.
Hello. Thank you for doing this, by the way. It was very informative. I appreciate it a lot. But my question is a little bit more theoretical. With the global economic crisis, if you could say, global economic crisis that's occurring over in the EU with the euro, and with Greece about to default, and Italy skyrocketing debt, the whole thing. And then, of course, obviously, with our intertwined economic system where the US, what happens over here affects them, and what happens over there affects us. This, again, like I said, might be practically impossible, but theoretically, would we benefit from perhaps a global jubilee where we were to cut debt entirely? This is a completely generalistic question. It's not directed towards any specific person.
Are you just talking about debt forgiveness?
Yes, like it's an ancient concept of a jubilee where a king would forgive debts.
Debt forgiveness is basically redistribution. And, I'd be happy if you forgive my debts. I'm not sure that the people that that I owe money to would be so happy about that. And that gets you back to maybe square one, but you don't solve the problems where how you got to where you are. And I'm not so sure that debt forgiveness leaves anybody in any different place relative to where they were. We just redistribute income in the economy. We still have winners and losers.
I think in some sense it's a redistribution of income in favor of those people that have been irresponsible. So I mean, the Greece has been spending a lot more money than they've taken in, and they have retirement packages that the people retire. They have a lot of restrictions on the economy, and why would you want to provide rewards for people that do these things? So I mean, the problem is that the monetary union, as it is, that they should break off the monetary union, because the only way they can pay their bills and redistribute income is through inflation. And so this is what inflation gives you. It gives you an adjustment that you can't have politically, because if you lower benefits, people are going to vote you out of office, which you can cause a lot of inflation. And so the upside of inflation is that you can control government activity that way.
Yes. Okay. I think it's safe to say that the debt will, in fact, be repudiated in one fashion or another. The debt is already being written down, right? The Greek sovereign debt's been written down, 50%. Italy will be written down. The debt is unwinding, it's deleveraging in the States. This will happen, and again, I agree with our colleagues that you either do this through market adjustment. Either you auction this debt off and let investors buy it for whatever they'll pay. I heard the story about the Franklin County in Alabama, which is Birmingham, Alabama, and they have the biggest municipal default on their debt in American history. And this was over sewage bonds. Well, they put these sewage bonds out for auction, and they were bought immediately. $1 million of them were bought immediately, 58 cents to the dollar. So this is repudiation, right? Sure, somebody takes a loss on this, but at least we get the process, we get an honest evaluation by financial investors of what this debt is worth, and then people can move on. Right? Now Franklin County can move on. They're free of the debt burden. They can be as efficient now as possible. So there is something to be said for honest, open debt repudiation. I don't know precisely what the questioner had in mind about modeling this after the year Jubilee. Maybe that would be somewhat more problematic in terms of efficiency. But that's the upside to debt repudiation. And this will happen. If it happens through inflation, it will be much worse for the economies of the world. Because inflation has its own independent inefficiency effects on the market. It should not inflate away the debt.
Comments? Any other comments? Okay. Next question. A couple more, then we have to... Yes, right there.
Thank you. I have a question for for the school here at I'm a little nervous. This is really exciting, actually. We're making history. Does everybody know that? Some of you kids might not understand, but we're making history. Anyways, I want to ask the Keynesian economists if you spoke of the necessity of a central bank as to, to bail out, these banking institutions that take on risks. Don't you think having a central bank in itself encourages risk? It's like the spoiled rich kid who has a rich dad who they know, hey, my dad will bail me out. I can wreck the new BMW. Isn't that sort of what the central bank does to the rest of our banking industry, causing them to all this wild speculation that wouldn't exist if they were all truly privately owned and they had to be responsible with their money, and a rebuttal from the Austrians, if they'd like.
No, first off, I won't be offended because you referred to me as a Keynesian. It's It's only understandable when we start putting labels on it. My son's also sitting there in the back of the room. He can tell you that his dad may have a lot of income, but don't bail him out very much. There's a difference. What's that? You can't print money out. Well, the Fed can't legally print money either. They can only monetize the debt that the government decides to put out. But the Federal Reserve was created for a very realistic reason. It serves to limit the last resort because banks are subject to panics where I'm sure you've all seen It's a Wonderful Life with Jimmy Stewart, where the old Bailey's building a loan, everybody ran on it and wanted the money back at once, and they didn't have all the money, so they loaned part of it out to somebody else. And this is what my Austrian colleagues are saying, but if we had 100% reserve, it wouldn't happen because 100% of that money would still be there, but of course the houses that money built wouldn't have been there, which is something different. But the Fed has to act responsibly. They can't just say, no matter what you do, we're going to be there to bail you out. And this gets into an issue which nobody has really raised tonight about the so-called too big to fail banks. And too big to fail banks are those that felt that their bankruptcy would do such irreparable harm to the economy that you must bail it out. And then I agree, whenever we start looking at somebody that is too big to fail, then we are promoting irresponsible behavior on their part because they aren't held to the standard that if I make ill-advised loans and don't follow sound banking practices, somebody's going to bail me out. I think there are cases where banks and other financial institutions that are normally sound in normal economies get caught in line in abnormal economies, and there is a role there for the Federal Reserve to bail them out. But I wouldn't at all advocate the Fed bailing out any irresponsible bank or business.
I've never been called a Keynesian.
I'm sorry.
Any other comments? I mean, to keep it short. Okay. Last question. Yeah, right there on the left. There you go.
Both of you said that in order for a recovery to happen, we would need to restore confidence and just get this debt issue addressed. And with the super committee in Congress saying today that they failed, where does that put us in light of the upcoming election? Are we going to have to wait until the next election for this debt issue to be addressed? And how will that affect the economy?
Well, I think politically things are pretty, I'm pretty pessimistic about the politics of the thing because before we had the super committee, we had last summer's, the shutdown, the default, the world's coming to an end. Before that, we had this historic budget agreement was supposedly cutting, putting us on the road to fiscal solvency. And, we worked night and day, almost had a shutdown, and we essentially cut between $9 and $10 billion in actual spending. And so, and this is a historic achievement. And so that's basically 2 days worth of borrowing we cut out, just 2 days worth. And that was after, tooth and nail negotiations and, a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so I think it's pretty clear that the politicians still really either don't have a clue or they just don't care. Or they can't afford to do it, they can't afford to be statesmen, because if they're going to be they're afraid if they are going to be a statesman, or stateswoman as the case may be, then they're not going to be able to face their constituency and they're going to be out of office. I would also say that the real problem is, there is a debt problem, but the real problem is the spending problem. Because it's government spending that takes money out of the hands of citizens out of the hands of entrepreneurs and investors and puts it in the hands of government bureaucrats. And after living in the Bureau for 2 years, I know bureaucracy is not the source of efficiency. The two most important, the two most often uttered phrases in the government is one, that's okay, it's good enough for government work. And secondly, that's okay, we don't have to make a profit. And when we have bureaucrats controlling a larger and larger amount of our economy, that is making us less efficient and making us relatively more impoverished every day they do this. So the problem isn't even the debt per se. If we solve the debt problem by raising taxes to cover 100% of the deficit, that is going to leave us in the same economic quandary we're in. So the key is to massively reduce spending, and I'm not sure if we have the stomach to do that.
Go ahead.
I think this is a political problem. I think people don't want to deal because they think the other guys are going to bear the cost, and I think it's only going to be resolved in an election. And I think perhaps the Democrats think that the Republicans are going to be seen as being obstacles to compromise, and most likely to suffer. And I think that, and in that vein, I think, they think, well, let's roll the dice with the election and see what happens. Plus, there's automatic cuts. I think there's draconian cuts in the Defense Department and cuts in other places. They could have had Simpson Bowles a while ago, and they didn't want that. So, but I think it's just with politicians, they're interested in elections, and I agree completely with. It's the size of government. What do you want government to do? The more they do, the more resources they take. And taxes is just about paying. How you pay for it. So I think it's the way it goes.
Ken, I totally agree with your point, is that with limited resources, the more the government takes, the less there is for other things. A lot of the things that government spends money on are not productive things. They don't produce anything else. And that's another problem. And when we are talking about, my emphasis on getting the debt under control relies on the fact that you either have to spend less or tax more. And whether you choose to spend less or not is kind of a political issue, which is what you're addressing and what Dr. Tanner said. I don't know. If you ask the majority of Americans, they would tell you that they want and they deserve. And I don't know, it's kind of, if everybody wants and everybody is entitled, it's kind of hard to get anything under control.
Any other comments or closing comments you want to make before we wrap it up?
I would just like to thank you all for attending, but I also like to thank my colleagues here from Girl City. It demonstrates that we have probably as many similarities and things that we agree upon as some of our differences.
And I lied about the bonus points.
But everyone, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. Also, I want to thank the SRU School of Business for sponsoring this event. Thank you so much. And if you did enjoy this event, please consider supporting Young Americans for Liberty. There's a donation basket outside the table. There's books, there's magazines. Take whatever you want if you want to drop something in the donation pile to keep us active. We really appreciate it. Take pizza. There's pizza in the back, so take some pizza, drink some pop, engage in dialogue. Thank you so much for coming out. Have a great night.
All right. She wants me to grab you.